Welcome to today's video, where we'll be diving into one of the most important events in Zimbabwe's history, the Ndebele Shona uprising, also known as the First Chimurenga. This uprising, which occurred between 1896 and 1897, was a moment of significant resistance against the British colonial rule, with key figures such as Nehanda and Lozikeyi playing pivotal roles in mobilizing the masses. In this video, we'll explore how the Ndebele and Shona communities were involved in the uprising, their leadership, and how their efforts set the stage for future resistance during the Second Chimurenga War. The late 19th century saw the rise of European colonialism in Africa, with Britain expanding its influence over what could later become Zimbabwe. The British South Africa Company, BSAC, under Cecil Rhodes, had established control over the region, introducing policies that oppressed the indigenous people. This included harsh taxation, land confiscation, forced labor, and restrictions on indigenous religion and culture. By the mid-1890s, both the Ndebele and Shona people were severely impacted by these changes. The Ndebele had been under the rule of King Lobengula, but after his defeat in 1893 during the First Matabele War, the Ndebele were left disillusioned and oppressed. Similarly, the Shona people, who had a history of resisting foreign rule, were increasingly angered by the British exploitation of their land and resources. The uprising was fueled by various factors: religious influence. Spirit mediums and traditional religious authorities provided unity across ethnic groups. Grievances, forced labor, taxation, and exploitation of resources motivated resistance. Environmental crisis, drought, locust plagues, and cattle diseases were blamed on white settlers. Leaders used their position to coordinate attacks on British settlements, demonstrating the unbroken spirit of the Shona and the Ndebele people. Women in the uprising. Two of the most iconic figures in the First Chimurenga were Nehanda and Lozikeyi Dlodlo. Both women used their societal position and spiritual influence to rally the people to fight against the colonial invaders. Nehanda. Nehanda was a spiritual leader of the Shona people, revered as a powerful medium and prophetess, a high-ranking spiritual leader, and was deeply connected to the ancestral spirits. Nehanda's influence was far-reaching, and she became a central figure in the resistance against the British rule. Her role in the uprising was crucial. Nehanda used her spiritual authority to galvanize the Shona people, calling upon them to rise up and resist colonial oppression. She symbolized the unity of the Shona people and their ability to fight for their independence. Nehanda's prophetic messages were a source of strength for the Shona rebels, as she encouraged them to not be afraid of dying, promising that their ancestors will help them in their struggle. Nehanda's leadership went beyond just military strategy. Her spiritual guidance provided a rallying cry that unified the people, even as they faced overwhelming odds. After the uprising was suppressed, Nehanda was captured, tried, and executed by the British, becoming a martyr for the cause of Zimbabwe's liberation. As she said, "Mafupango achamuka, my bones shall rise." Nehanda employed several key strategies during the 1896 uprising, the First Chimurenga War. Religious leadership. As a powerful spiritual medium of the Zezuri Shona people, Nehanda used her religious authority to inspire and mobilize the masses. Organizational skills. She was instrumental in organizing nationwide participation in the First Chimurenga, coordinating efforts across different regions. Alliance building. Nehanda worked alongside other spiritual leaders like Mukwati and Kagubi to create a united front against colonial rule. Ideological framing. She used the Mwari cult and traditional cultural symbols to provide a spiritual and ideological framework for the rebellion. Prophetic message. Nehanda preached that the white settlers were the cause of troubles like locusts and Grinda pest, encouraging people to drive them out. Motivational tactics. She claimed that Mwari would turn the bullets of the white men into water, boosting the morale of the fighters. Strategic planning. Nehanda meticulously crafted strategies for social protest that led to the First Chimurenga War. Cultural preservation. She was committed to upholding traditional Shona culture, using it as a rallying point against colonial influence. These strategies demonstrate Nehanda's role not just as a spiritual leader, but as a key strategist and organizer in the First Chimurenga. Lozikeyi Dlodlo. Lozikeyi, the wife of the Ndebele king, Lobengula, played an equally important role during the First Chimurenga. After the death of Lobengula, Lozikeyi assumed a leadership role among the Ndebele people. Lozikeyi's influence in the resistance movement cannot be overstated. She was instrumental in organizing the Ndebele resistance against the British South Africa Company. She rallied both men and women to participate in the uprising, using her position as the king's widow to mobilize people to fight for their rights. As a matriarchal figure, she appealed to the Ndebele people's deep sense of culture and identity, urging them to protect their land and traditions from the encroaching colonialists. Queen Lozikeyi Dlodlo employed several key strategies during the 1896 uprising against the British colonial rule. Military preparation. She ensured the Ndebele army had sufficient ammunition for the war by utilizing weaponry that her husband, King Lobengula, had not used in the previous Anglo-Ndebele War of 1893. Leadership and coordination. Lozikeyi took charge of the king's army and, along with her twin brother Mtwani, led the resistance against colonial rule and land deposition. Strategic planning. She wisely stored ammunition not used by King Lobengula, which was later utilized by the Imbi's arrangement against John Rhodes' forces. Alliance building. Lozikeyi skillfully navigated the complex political landscape, forming alliances with other African leaders to present a united front against colonial rule. Diplomatic efforts. She led peace negotiations in the Matobo Mountains when the conflict reached a stalemate, resulting in an amnesty and ceasefire. Coordinated attacks. Under her leadership, attacks were coordinated on British settlements, demonstrating the unbroken spirit of the Ndebele people. These strategies showcase Queen Lozikeyi's military acumen, diplomatic skills, and political savvy in leading the Ndebele resistance during the 1896 uprising. Her defiance and leadership inspired future generations, earning her recognition as the foremother of ZIPRA, Zimbabwe People's Revolutionary Army. Lozikeyi's role was largely behind the scenes, but her contributions were vital in coordinating resistance and supplying support to the fighters. Her leadership ensured that the Ndebele would stand united, even in the face of British brutality. Like Nehanda, Lozikeyi's legacy lives on as a symbol of African female empowerment in the face of colonial oppression. Other notable figures included Mukwati, a priest of the Ngwari cult, active throughout Mashonaland; Kagubi Gumbure Shumba, a spiritual medium in the Goromonzi area; Mulimo, the Matebele spiritual leader who incited much of the anger leading to the uprising; traditional chiefs like Mashaya Mombe, Makoni, Nyandoro, Mapontera, Mangwende, Seke were traditional chiefs instrumental in the rebellion, not forgetting Mulugulu and Sginyamate, the Ndebele leaders who played key roles. Chaminuka as well, a spiritual figure important in the political discourse. Shoshe, Mbire, Marange and Mutasa of Manika. The Ndebele and Shona collaboration. While the Ndebele and Shona had distinct languages and cultural practices, the First Chimurenga saw a significant collaboration between the two groups. Both communities had grievances against the colonial system, and their shared experience of exploitation provided a common ground for unity. Key leaders from both sides, such as Nehanda and Lozikeyi, understood the cooperation between the Shona and Ndebele were necessary to mount an effective resistance against the British. The two groups shared intelligence, coordinated their attacks, and assisted one another in terms of supplies and support. This unity, despite their historical differences, provided to be one of the strengths of the First Chimurenga. The uprising began in 1896 with widespread revolts erupting in Mashonaland, Shona territories, and Matebeleland, Ndebele territories. It was characterized by guerrilla-style tactics, with rebels attacking British settlers and their outposts, as well as the British South Africa Company's installations. The initial phases of the uprising were marked by significant victories, but the colonial forces quickly responded with brutality, launching a counter-insurgency campaign that eventually crushed the rebellion. The legacy of the First and the Second Chimurenga. Although the First Chimurenga ultimately failed in the short term, it laid the foundation for future resistance. The defeat of the uprising did not mean the end of the struggle against British colonialism. The First Chimurenga became a symbol of defiance and resistance, and the martyrdom of figures like Nehanda and Lozikeyi inspired future generations of Zimbabwe. The lessons learned from the First Chimurenga would resonate during the Second Chimurenga, also known as the Zimbabwe War of Liberation, in the 1960s and 1970s. The memory of Nehanda's prophecy and Lozikeyi's leadership fueled the passion of the new generation of fighters who would go on to eventually overthrow British colonial rule and pave the way for an independent Zimbabwe. In particular, the Second Chimurenga leaders such as Joshua Nkoma and Robert Mugabe drew on the spirit of the First Chimurenga. The unity between the Shona and the Ndebele, the strategic use of guerrilla warfare, and the role of women as leaders and organizers were all lessons passed down from the earlier uprising. The Ndebele Shona uprising of 1896 to 1897, or the First Chimurenga, was a landmark moment in Zimbabwe's history. The roles played by figures like Mbuya and Lozikeyi Dlodlo highlighted the deep cultural and spiritual ties that could be leveraged to organize and resist colonial domination. Although the First Chimurenga was ultimately suppressed, it had a lasting impact. It formed the basis for later mass nationalism. Stories of heroic exploits became a great source of inspiration during the Second Chimurenga in the mid-1960s. The unity between Shona and Ndebele people set a precedent for future resistance efforts. The First Chimurenga demonstrated the complex nature of anti-colonial resistance involving struggles over land, cattle, and taxes. It sent a powerful message about the resistance and determination of the indigenous people, inspiring future generations to continue the fight for independence. As we reflect on this crucial period in Zimbabwe's history, we are reminded of the sacrifices made and the enduring spirit of resistance that would eventually lead to independence in 1980. Matarenda's Africa News Channel. Subscribe, follow, and share.